I am the problem because I'm just an overthinker. I'm bad with money and I'm not disciplined and I'm just not confident. That's just I'm just bad at, I'm bad at love. That's just who I am. How many of us have identified with something like that before? Welcome back to Michelle Lives Embodied. I want to talk about today how our identity drives our behavior a lot of the times, right? So before we get into the video, I just want to say thank you everyone for joining, and for those who have subscribed, thank you. The people that are watching the videos, if you have any input and comments for me, or any suggestions that you make on something that you're struggling with and that you feel like we can discuss, I'd be more than happy to do that. Now, what I'm trying to do here is build the channel, build a community for women like you and me, or men, whoever you are on the other side there. Okay, so like, subscribe to the channel, share with someone that you know who could benefit from joining in on the journey. Okay, so I want to talk about identity, because our identity really does drive our behavior. And it's, simply a story that we tell ourselves of who we are. So if I could make one thing different, like having more money or, building my confidence, my life would be different, right? That's what we tell ourselves. My life would be different, if I had more money. But we continue to identify ourselves with somebody who has no discipline when it comes to money, which is bad with money. I don't know how to manage finances. That's not who I am. So you see the problem, we're identifying the problem first as us telling ourselves the story of who we are. That's the identity that we have created. So I'm an overthinker, I'm bad with money, and I'm not disciplined, or I'm just not confident, right? So when we continue to tell ourselves those things, what happens, right? We start to believe it. And when you believe something that you have now identified with, you're embodying that belief, right? So every decision that you make will always unconsciously support that belief or that story or that identity, right? So have you ever noticed that we behave a certain way, and when we become the person that we believe who we are? So like for me, for example, I always identified as a people pleaser. I identified as someone who had anxiety, who was depressed. I identified before with somebody who needed constant reassurance, to feel secure in who I was. That was something, those identities were who I convinced myself who I was. I convinced myself that I was, bad at money, making money, or managing money. you know, I had a hard time believing in myself and what I was capable of. You know, even with making these videos, right? I struggled with that. You know, I had to really convince myself that yes, you are capable. You can do this, and stop identifying with somebody who's scared to talk in front of the camera, right? That's not who I am. I become someone who is secure enough to know what you want to say, the point that you want to make. Yes, I still have to take notes so that I can keep a structure on what I want to talk about without getting too sidetracked, because unfortunately ADD is still roping. Even though I try not to identify with it so much, so it doesn't have so much power over me or control over my life, but I do have some struggles with focusing still. So we need to identify those labels that we have been giving ourselves and stop repeating those, because every time we repeat those identities about who we believe we are, we strengthen them. We just building the strength in our nervous system and in our brains, in our minds, that to believe that's who we are, and that's who we are not capable of change. And every single one of us are always capable of change if you really want it. So one thing I did is I stopped asking, how do I fix my life, right? And I started asking myself, well, who am I really becoming? You know, am I becoming somebody that my kids can be proud of? Am I becoming someone that I am proud of? You know, and I do want to ask you guys to, you know, put down in the comments, what are some examples that you have been identifying with, that you have been carrying for years? You know, and then ask yourself this, you know, I challenge you to ask yourself, is that really true? Is that identity really true? Or have you just repeated it so many times that you have convinced yourself that it's true? So I do want to end this with, you know, that challenge. You know, put it in the comments if you would. Let me know. Your identity is always going to be built in one decision every day, even the small choices that you make. You know, whether that's going to be keeping a promise to yourself, setting boundaries, and, you know, choosing growth. And let's be honest, growth is very uncomfortable. And so get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because, you know, every time that you set that boundary, you keep that promise, you're casting a vote towards the woman that you admire and the woman that you're becoming. Okay? So thanks again, everyone, for joining in to Michelle Lives Embodied. Side note, for my followers and viewers, don't forget to like, subscribe again, and also check out in my playlist, I added my new album, Soy Ella. I released it today and I'm so proud of it. You know, Soy Ella was something that I started creating for fun, right? It was just something that I started to do as fun, as a hobby. It helped me in my healing process, in the journey through the pain that I was going through, the inner torn, you know, the pain that I was suffering from, and it was a way for me to express myself. It is a story, and it starts off being wrapped in a soul tie with someone who was very dear to me. And this person of course, is one of the reasons why I made decision to start becoming the woman that I admire, you know, to work on myself, because believe it or not, those wounds, they do run deep. You know, the past, the traumas, they run deep. And believe it or not, they affect your identity and those behaviors. And so that's why I felt really strongly about making this video about how we identify. So check it out. Let me know what you think. Follow and share my music. It's all part of the journey for me, and I hope you guys enjoy it. Love you, and